Hello, and welcome back to Zenin Fanfics. Today we're starting part 37 of an exciting new series. What if Villain Deku became a teacher at U.A? If you enjoy this video, please like and subscribe for more content. The story we're featuring is written by Bloomer Bill on Fanfiction.net. You can find all the relevant links in the description, so be sure to check out the author's profile and say hello. Now let's dive into the story. Suddy, please calm down, Fumikage requested as he watched his sibling rush around their room, going through their baubles and leaving shiny cloth and other random objects all over the place, mostly the floor. How am I supposed to calm down? Suddy squawked back, utterly beside himself, as they threw themselves at Fumikage's chest, and he wrapped his arms around them. Suddy probably would have been crying if they could. Bakuga's friend Izuku got us tickets to the sports festival, and we were going to meet him and his friends for the first time. We can't just show up empty-handed, Suddy exclaimed, and Fumikage couldn't argue with him on that point. He himself felt both nervous and excited about what was going to happen today. Bakuga's offer to come with him to watch the first years in person was completely unexpected, but neither of them would think about turning him down. How often would they get a chance to see the festival in person? The big rub, though. The reason Bakuga had tickets was because his previous victim and now cautious friend Izuku had offered him some, since he knew that they all wanted to be heroes. So, they would be meeting the now famous boy for the first time, and Fumikage would be lying if he told anyone that he wasn't nervous about this. Because while Bakuga claimed that Izuku would absolutely adore them both, Fumikage couldn't stop a small voice in the back of his mind from saying that Izuku might not be so kind to them as the friends of his best friend turned bully. Seeing how cold he could be from the interview last week had not helped to disprove the voice either. And if that wasn't enough to give them anxiety, they would also be meeting Izuku's three friends as well. Friends Bakuga had only met once before and didn't know that well, aside from what Izuku had told him, and likely hadn't known what Bakuga had done to Izuku. So that was another layer on top of everything else to worry about. Because there were three new people to worry about suddenly turning on the three of them, especially ones that probably would not be as understanding of the weird and often tense relationship Bakuga and Izuku had. Fumikage barely understood it, and Bakuga had told him and Suddy everything. If he had been in Izuku's shoes, he strongly doubted he could ever be in the same room as Bakuga, much less give him tickets to the festival or try and rebuild a friendship with him. Which probably sounded hypocritical since he had chosen to befriend Bakuga even after knowing about Izuku. But as naive as it sounded, it was different. Bakuga wasn't his bully, and he hadn't been the one Bakuga was cruel to. And Bakuga was very different from what he used to be like. And unlike most, wouldn't go back to his old behavior, because Bakuga was constantly berating his old self's actions. People rarely self-reflect as strong as Bakuga did, which Fumikage had to admit was warranted and seemed to be helping to keep Bakuga from falling back into old habits. Fumi, do you think that this sparkly tie would be too much? Suddy asked, bringing Fumikage out of his head, and he realized that Suddy must have gone back to scrounging for pretty things to give Izuku's friends. Fumikage blinked in confusion at first why Suddy was holding the tie up to their neck before he understood that they didn't mean for the tie to be a gift. Suddy, you can't wear clothes? Fumikage gently reminded his twin, and they threw their hands up in exasperation. I can dream, Fumi, Suddy replied, throwing the tie aside and throwing themselves onto his bed and burying their face in his pillow. Fumikage sighed, and he moved to his chest of shiny baubles, searching through the items for a bit until he found a charm bracelet and sat beside Suddy on the bed. I think Uraraka-san would like this one, Fumikage suggested, and Suddy raised their head to see what he was showing and gasped before chirping with happiness. She'd love this, Fumi. Who could resist the cute panda? Suddy exclaimed, playing with the little pink and white panda charm on the bracelet. We should probably stick to a couple bags of marbles for the others. Most people like marbles, Fumikage told his twin, and Suddy paused to look at him for a few moments. Can we at least give them the glitter ones? Suddy asked, and Fumikage facepalmed. Yes, Fumikage agreed and accepted the hug from Suddy afterwards. Fumikage did his best to keep his breathing even and calm in order to keep his feathers from puffing up. Standing in front of the stadium on UA grounds was far more intimidating than he thought it would be. Having Bakuga beside him admittedly helped to mitigate his nerves, though Suddy seemed to be getting unusually quiet as approached the ticket booth. Fumikage could still feel them twisting around inside of him. At least he now understood why it felt like he had a small animal squirming around in his chest when Suddy was upset. He was feeling them move around in their little pocket inside his body. It was a small comfort, though, as his and Bakuga's turn to hand over their tickets came. The woman blinking as she looked at Fumikage and tapping at a tablet, her face scrunched up in confusion, something that made his stomach drop. "Boy, what's the hold-up?" Bakuga grumbled, shooting the woman a glare, who quickly waved her hands in surrender. No, sir, just need to confirm something," the woman told him, placating. Bakuga scoffed. "Well, hurry it up, we got people to meet," Bakuga said, agitated, but Fumikage was glad Bakuga had refrained from cursing at the woman so far. The crowd around them was likely what caused him to be so riled up, and Fumikage could only hope that their seats would be quieter. "All right, sorry about the delay. I just need to grab something from the back real quick." The woman apologized, racing off to the back before handing them both a pair of lanyards, Fumikage being a different color and striped oddly enough. Bakuga muttered, just as confused as he was. "It's a familiar pass, so the security won't bother your friend, dear. Run along now," the woman encouraged, shooing them away. With the people behind them already muttering darkly, they didn't need more prompting. Bakuga scared, "Figures that Izuku would make sure you both could enjoy this, you can come out now, right, potty?" Bakuga questioned, and Suddy slid out with their form being small enough to fit in his palm. Their small head shyly peeking over his shoulder as they walked towards their seats, following the numbers on their lanyards to find the area they were supposed to be in, the people thinning out as they went up to the next floor. Thankfully, Bakuga was calmer, without the line of people behind them. "Bakugan," a voice called out, and Fumikage jumped, realizing that he'd been so focused on Suddy and Bakuga he wasn't paying any attention to his surroundings, and saw down the hall was a girl waving them over. Bakuga rolled his eyes. "That's the gravity girl. She's annoying." Bakuga grumbled to him as the girl raced up to them and gave them a quick bow. "Hi, you must be Tokoimi-san. Izuku has mentioned you before, but it's so good to finally meet you." Uraraka-san cheerfully greeted. "I'm Uraraka Achiko, but just call me Yukai." She followed that with her own name. Too bright, Fumikage thought, finding himself somewhat overwhelmed by the girl's demeanor. Most people he knew weren't this energetic besides Suddy. Uraraka gasped, "Oh my gosh, is that Suddy? They're adorable." Uraraka-san proclaimed, and was about to move closer to him, but Bakuga put his hand in her face and pushed her back slightly. "Calm your tips, Newton F. Bakuga spat, though not unkindly, as he grabbed Fumikage by the arm and pulled him along. "Ding, chill, cat. Yukai was just excited to meet your friends, another person, one from inside the box wearing a bandana," said as they entered. Bakuga flipped them off, and Fumikage was glad there was only one other person in the room, since most people probably wouldn't be so calm about Bakuga doing that. Though he had to admit the guy in the mask was intimidating, to say the least. "PSS off dollar store hat rack, and I told you to stop calling me that," Bakuga told the boy, and Fumikage shot Bakuga a look. The boy thankfully laughed it off. Yeah. "I'm a Waze Yosetsu, and this is Shoji Mizo, though we just call him Gigi," the boy said, introducing himself, and the other person who raised one of their 6 arms, which formed into a mouth. "Hello," the little mouth said. Fumikage swallowed a lump. "Hello, Shoji-san. Away-san," he replied with a bow, just as Uraraka-san had come back into the room, looking sheepish, likely not helped by Suddy ducking behind himself. Sorry. Didn't mean to scare you earlier, Suddy-chan," Uraraka-san apologized, fiddling with her fingers. "It is all right. Suddy isn't used to much attention." Fumikage assured her they were quite excited to meet you all. Fumikage commented, and Suddy popped their small head up and over Fumicage's shoulder again. Away-san's eyes widened. "Oh, hey there. I didn't notice them before, but they're adorable," he said, leaning in but not moving closer to them. Suddy gave an embarrassed squawk and hid their face in Fumicage's neck. Fumi Suddy whined in his head. Fumikage groaned, internally realizing that he wouldn't be able to rely on Suddy to help him through this complex social situation. Then again, they probably wouldn't be able to help much either way, since this was a rather alien situation for both of them. And Bakuga had the tact of a brick, so he decided it likely wouldn't be the best idea to rely on him, and chose to take out the gifts he had. "Suddy wanted to give you these. They didn't think it would be proper to meet you without giving you something," Fumikage explained as he offered the 2 bags of marbles to the boys, to their apparent pleasant surprise. "Thank you, Suddy-san. That was very kind of you." Shoji-san replied, carefully examining the marbles through the clear baggie. "Yeah, these are awesome, but now I feel bad we didn't think to bring either of you something." Away-san commented, rubbing the side of his neck. Fumikage began to have second thoughts about giving Uraraka-san the bracelet, even if it was just a step above costume jewelry, if this was how they reacted to the marbles. However, Suddy took the choice out of his hands and in a larger form came out with the bracelet and floated over to Uraraka-san, offering it. Uraraka-san gave a soft gasp and gently took the jewelry, happily putting it on, admiring it. "Thank you. This is so nice of you both. After this, what do you say to us all going out and buying something for you in return?" Uraraka-san suggested, and Suddy perked up at the thought. "Hey, yeah, that sounds like a perfect idea, Yukai. Zuri probably knows a good place nearby to get some nice SHD," Away-san said, and Shoji-san nodded in agreement. "Oh, for F's sake, are you numbskulls done playing meet and greet yet? They're going to start the festival soon, and I don't want to listen to you shooting the SHD," Bakuga spat, having lost his patience, and probably ready to drag Fumikage to his seat regardless of their answer. "He's right," Shoji-san commented, showing the time with his phone. "We should go sit down," the tall boy added. "Eh, if it's that close to opening, shouldn't there be more people here by now?" Uraraka-san pointed out, and Fumikage found himself agreeing with her confusion. "Bakuga, scared, this is a private box, cheeks. We're the only ones going to be here, unless Izuku invited someone else to join us without saying F all about it." Bakuga answered the girl. "Private box. But regular tickets are expensive enough. I never would have agreed to come if I knew he'd dash." Uraraka-san sputtered, only for Bakuga to, very lightly, smack her upside the head. "He's a part of the faculty, cheeks. The rat principal gave him the spots free of charge, you idiot. These faculty boxes are usually empty or given to high-ranking heroes who donate money to the school. Us being here means those rich assholes actually had to buy a seat here like everyone else." Bakuga corrected gruffly. "Oh," Uraraka-san lamely muttered as she ducked her head to hide her red cheeks and ducked into Shoji-san's side. Before any more could be said, they all heard a loud jingle blared and turned to look out to the field. Asterisk, hey, everybody. Asterisk, the recognizable voice of Present Mike rang out throughout the whole area, followed by the loud cheer of the crowd. "Welcome, little listeners, to A's Sports Festival. Whether you're watching with us live at the stadium or joining us over the airwaves, we're happy to have you all here today. I'm your host for the first year's Present Mike. And for the first time in over 50 years, folks, we have one of the top 10 here with us to give their opinions live with me. Please give my lovely co-host Hawks a warm round of applause." Present Mick's words almost drowned out fully by the next roar of the crowd. Fumikage winced at the sound, only to jolt when he felt a pair of hands cover his ear holes and turned to find Shoji-san's secondary limbs had split off to multiple different limbs, which all ended in hands that covered everyone's ears. Away-san beamed up at the boy and gave the boy a thumbs up. "Thanks, Gigi." Fumikage faintly heard Away-san say, the hands being an effective tool for damping the noise around them. Asterisk, you guys are all too kind. Save some of that zest for the kids. They have put a lot of training into giving you all a heck of a show today. Asterisk Hawks told the crowd in an attempt to calm them. "Speaking of, I think it's about time we introduce you little listeners to our lovely students this year," Mike said, just as the larger doors in the stadium walls opened up and Fumikage leaned forward to get a better look at them. Asterisk, we have our colorful cast of students of 1A ready to break out into every single branch of heroics. Asterisk, Mike proclaimed, and Fumikage had to admit that Mike was right in calling them colorful. Fumikage couldn't remember the last time 1A, or any U, class could have looked like a rainbow embodied by just 15 people. Asterisk, then we have 1B. Not as cheery as the last lot, but I'm quite sure they'll make a more than a mean opponent for their sister class, even if there's only the 3 of them. Asterisk Hawks said, drawing attention to the smallest class Fumikage could recall seeing in his time, as only 3 people walk onto the field. Asterisk, and of course we'd be quite remiss to forget about our favorite classes of troopers. Gen Ed classes 1C, 1D, and 1E. Make sure to give them their due, since they'll be the everyday heroes you'll rely on one of these days. Asterisk, Mike exclaimed as the 3 doorways opened and students poured out of them. Asterisk, or forget to give an adieu to our ever-tireless support corps students. I know I'll be keeping an eye on them. We heroes could always use another good tech whiz on the payroll. Perhaps even one of the kids in 1F, 1G, or 1H will join the crew. I have one day. Asterisk Hawks added, and Fumicage's eyes became locked on the support course's gear. All of which practically gleaming once the light hit them. Shiny. Suddy happily chirped, moving to balcony's edge, and Fumicage couldn't blame them. If he wasn't sitting with friends, he likely would have joined them to preen on the gear. Distanced by both the shiny metal of the support course and Suddy's refound cheer, that Fumicage must have missed the introduction of the business course and was only had his attention taken by the loud gasp of Uraraka-san. "Oh my gosh," she cried, pointing towards the risen stage in the middle of the arena, where a familiar-looking green-haired boy stood adjusting a microphone. Fumicage's own mouth fell an inch as he stared down at the boy, but Kuga hadn't told them that Izuku would be one of the umpires this year, and judging by the look on everyone else's faces, none of them knew either. Asterisk, and last but not in any way the least, allow me to introduce the one to watch over our fledglings on this major day in their lives. The one and only Midoriya Izuku, the TA of our beloved teacher Bulletjacker. Asterisk, Mike introduced, and both Uraraka-san and Away-san immediately shot up to their feet and began cheering and clapping for their friend. Fumicage clapped for the boy, as was polite, and Suddy was a bit louder with their clapping, though they didn't cheer. But after Fumicage stopped noticing that something was off, and it took him a moment to understand just what. Aside from the people in their box, the stadium was almost dead silent. After a few more seconds, both Uraraka-san and Away-san's cheer trailed off, and they similarly felt an unease build up in their box. But Kuga's clenched jaw and dour demeanor wasn't helping the tense atmosphere. Because as bad as complete silence would have been, Fumicage realized there was something worse than that. Since without the previous roar of the crowd, they could hear everyone muttering to each other about Izuku. From the disbelieving of Izuku actually being the umpire, to more malicious tones Fumicage couldn't believe were coming out of the mouth of actual heroes, saying things that frankly would have been more at home in the comment section of those QTP videos of Bakugo and Izuku they watched so long ago than in UA's Sports Festival Stadium. A fact that made Fumicage's guts twist in on themselves. He had dreamed about being down there in the arena, but he couldn't imagine standing beside Izuku down there with a crowd of thousands of people like that staring down at him, whispering the things they were. Izuku, however, merely smiled up at the crowd, without any hint of discomfort. As their eyes briefly met, Fumicage couldn't help thinking, or wondering really, if he would ever one day have the same level of confidence in himself to face such an overwhelmingly negative crowd without wavering in the slightest. There had been a lot of things about Midoriya that hadn't made sense to Mizo when they first met. There were the more outlandish things that would boggle anyone surely enough, like how much money he made, the fact Midoriya was his mother's boss despite being the same age as himself, or how the South Side all gave him a lot of respect. But personally, the thing about Midoriya that baffled him the most was how anxious the boy used to be of other people. Mizo could brush off the timidness when it came to himself, his mother, or any of the others in the South Side. Their quirks made most of them intimidating if they weren't criminals in their own right. However, if anything, the longer Mizo knew the boy, the clearer it became that Midoriya was more comfortable with them than everyone else. And for the longest time, Mizo just couldn't understand why. As someone whose quirk commonly made them look scary, Mizo understood that Midoriya likely had some troubles for not having a quirk in the first place, and that might make someone wary of people, but not to the extent of how terrified Midoriya used to be of anyone that wasn't his students. Midoriya looked like a normal person after all, and most wouldn't know about his lack of a quirk unless he said something about it. But as he now stood in the midst of a crowd of heroes, many of whom whispering things he couldn't believe a professional hero would ever say about a child, much less his friend, Mizo felt that he was slowly coming to understand why Midoriya was so afraid of others. If this was how the people who were sworn to protect people were talking about him, then just how bad did regular people treat Midoriya? Had living in the South Side really blinded him that much to how badly Two Toes were treated outside of it? Looking around, however, Mizo saw that Yukai, Aways, Suddy-san, and Tokoimi-san were equally taken aback by the reaction of the crowd as he was. Bakugo, although clearly angry, was far more composed than Mizo supposed he would be since he'd known Midoriya the longest out of all of them, and was probably the most aware of the depth of discrimination against those without quirks. Mizo couldn't help feeling disappointed with himself for not being aware of it. Aside from Bakugo, he'd known Midoriya the longest, and had seen in person how skittish the boy was years ago. Even for a 13-year-old, Midoriya was so small, hunching in on himself if he wasn't lost to his mumbling, and there were days Mizo would have sworn that Midoriya would apologize for breathing. Even if Midoriya made excuses about it being his anxiety and that he wasn't used to having friends, Mizo should have realized that Midoriya's fear of others didn't just come from nowhere. Turning to look down towards his friend, Mizo couldn't help a growing pit of worry building in his stomach. As confident as Midoriya had grown, concern wormed through Mizo. He wasn't the focus of all the discourse going on around them, and it made him uneasy. He couldn't imagine how it could be affecting Midoriya right now. But as he glanced down to the center of the field where the stage was, he saw Midoriya's eyes were locked onto their box with a small smile and looking for all the world as calm as could be. Not even a hint of acknowledgement towards the crowd around them. Why was he so calm? 'Cause all those extra shittiness doesn't mean PP all to him, Eldritch F. Bakugo suddenly said, surprising Mizo, and he turned to the boy shocked. Had he really said that out loud? What do you dash? He tried to ask, but Bakugo sked, rolling his eyes. Izuku used to be a doormat, but thanks to you idiots he's grown a spine and pulled his head out of his, but stop giving as much of a F about the dumbass, not worth his time. Bakugo explained, jabbing a thumb towards the wall and presumably towards the people in other boxes in the crowd. Any extra that chooses to take time off to watch a bunch of kids beat the SHD out of each other ain't worth the CRP they're spewing. As far as Izuku is concerned, we might as well be the only people here in the stands. Bakugo added. Before Mizo or anyone else could ask for any clarity on what Bakugo meant by that, the sound of someone tapping a microphone rang throughout the stadium. Thank you for such a warm welcome, though I would hate to distract anyone from the main reason we're all here. So with great pleasure, I'd like to welcome one Ace Haku Rinko to make this year's student pledge. Midoriya spoke, with a slight jab at the crowd in his words before he motioned for one of the students to come up and join him. And on Izuku's prompting, a young girl with her hair in twin ponytails and odd ears to run up on stage with him. Thanks for the opportunity, Deku-Sensei. Now then, the young woman said with a bow to Midoriya before she turned to the crowd and her eyes narrowed at them. Perhaps she too wasn't so pleased by their response to Midoriya. Mizo wouldn't doubt that the students were attached to Midoriya by this point. Most of Midoriya's liked him on a personal level, and he worked with him for at least a month now. You know, I didn't have a lot of support in becoming a hero. Haku began, letting her eyes slid across the stadium. My quirk makes touching anything difficult unless I'm wearing gloves, and that isn't touching on my medical issues. She told them all, and Mizo nodded along. His own quirk made most uncomfortable, and he couldn't remember a time people took anything from him when he offered it with his hands, aside from his friends and mom, of course. But you know what? I am here, at ULA, the best hero school in the country, because I worked my butt off to get here, the girl told the crowd, and most were probably confused by the fact she didn't seem to be that proud about saying that. I even dreamed about being up here, and I can't count how many times I rewrote my original speech. I wanted to tell all of you just how much this moment was supposed to mean to me, about how strong I worked just to finally be here. Haku spoke, her face scrunching up as her anger became even more clear. But frankly speaking, the only thing I can think of right now is just how unbelievable it is that there are so many bigots with a hero license out there right now. Haku spat at the crowd, and Mizo's hearing caught more than a few affronted gasps from the people around them. I couldn't believe it when there were so many people outside the gates of UA demanding for Deku-Sensei to be fired after he was only doing his job. But I thought, hey, it's just a group of crazy quirkist idiots, and it wasn't that big of a deal. Haku said, waving one of her hands mockingly to go along with her anecdote. Yet, here we are with a bunch of heroes who won't even show the facade of a shred of respect and clap politely for someone quirkless. Haku told them with her face in a sneer. And I can't begin to tell you how disgusting it is to hear grown men and women trash-talking someone my age all because of quirk status. She added a second later with venom in her voice. But then Haku scoffed and smirked up at the crowd with daggers in her eyes. However, at the same time, I can't help but find the fact that so many grown but people being threatened by a teenager of all people utterly hilarious. Haku said, putting her hand on her hip. gleefully throwing even more shade at the offended heroes in the stands with them. But hey, we aren't here to talk about the quirky stuff you adults have been forcing us to deal with. You want to hear me make a stupid pledge on behalf of my year? Haku commented with a shrug. So today I pledge that I'll show each and every one of you idiots just how much a quirk really means in heroics. And I won't use my quirk today to show you just how far someone can go without one. The girl promised with vicious grin, and Mizo heard even more gasps. And I think you lot will find I won't be the only person in the hero course to do so today. Consider it our protest against you for trying to fire one of our favorite teachers. Haku added offhandedly before she gave the mic back to Midoriya, apparently done speaking. Then she hopped off the stage to the clapping and cheers of not the crowd, but of all the other classes, her 14 other classmates being the loudest to show their approval of Haku's pledge along with one of the support courses. The sound of clapping beside him caused him to look away from the field to Bakugo, who had an equally vicious grin on his face as he clapped for the girl, and a second later Mizo joined along with everyone else in their booth. However, his eyes couldn't help falling back to Midoriya, wondering just how his friend would react to the speech in his defense. And the scene is unsurprising, at least for Mizo has come to expect from Midoriya whenever he gets praised. A twinge of pink on his cheeks and eyes welled up with tears, hands tightly gripping the mic, and a look of complete surprise, but absolutely overwhelmed by the fact someone would stand up for him. Though to be fair to Midoriya, Mizo probably would be in the same boat if he was in Midoriya's shoes. Haku had chosen to spit in the face of many people in her chosen field in order to defend Midoriya, even at the cost of her own career later, since her choice no doubt would be seen by everyone. Which would be more than enough, but then to have the rest of the first years cheering for it. With who knows how many choosing to join her in protest. How Midoriya hadn't started crying was a miracle in and of itself really. Hawk's chuckle and clapping shocked Mizo, having been so focused on the field, and his own musing made him completely forgot about the two announcers. Well, I can't speak for everyone, but I for one think that Haku's pledge is one I can personally get behind. Don't you think, Mike? Hawk said, and Mike was quick to reply. Absolutely, my fine feathered friend. But this introduction is becoming a drag, so why don't we let Midoriya tell us what our first event of the festival will be? Mike encouraged. Will do, Mike. Midoriya agreed, having gotten himself back together, and pressed a clicker, and bringing up the dial, and letting it spin. They watched as the dial eventually landed on one of the activities. Oh, looks like we're going to be watching the kids deal with the roundabouts today. Mike commented, would you be so generous as to tell any first-time listeners how this event works, little buddy? Mike requested. Midoriya huffed, but complied all the same. Swings and Roundabouts is an event where the students will all get on one of 11 roundabouts and randomly given one of these colored wristbands, with their goal being to get onto the roundabout that matches the color of their given wristband. Midoriya said, holding up a bright red wristband and signing away with his other after placing the mic back in its stand. The students will have 10 minutes to do this. The wristbands have trackers, and the students have to make it to the middle of the roundabout to trigger the device and register you as one of the 42 students moving on. Midoriya explained. However, the student must remain on the roundabout or lose their place. The roundabout will speed up over the 10 minutes, and if they fall off a roundabout, they'll be disqualified. The event will end before the 10-minute mark if 42 students manage to get to the right roundabout, or there is only 42 students left on the roundabouts altogether. Midoriya further told everyone, though the screens certainly provided good enough visuals for them to understand. Naturally, the students aren't allowed to seriously harm each other, but they can fight if they wish during the 10 minutes. Midoriya pointed out, any questions, kids? Midoriya asked, his eyes on the crowd of students. A loud chorus of "No Deku-Sensei" came from the students, loud enough to be heard even without a microphone of their own. Midoriya chuckled, then I think we should let you all get started. Mike, if you will. Midoriya requested, looking up to the commentator booth. And in that moment, Mizo couldn't help savoring just how far his friend had come from where he started out. Midoriya, a year or so ago, would likely never have the will to stand down there as the umpire. He was more than likely steadfastly ignoring the crowd as a whole, but here he was and making waves in the heroics community all the same. When Rinko woke up that morning, she had never been more nervous and excited than she ever was in her life. She hadn't lied about that. It wasn't every day you get the chance to show off all of the training you've done and get the chance to be scouted by all of the heroes in Japan, or maybe even someone from another country. And she'd be sure to have eyes on her as the person with the highest score on the entrance exam. Her classmates had watched her up till they were called out by Mike pacing back and forth as she went over the papers she wrote and rewrote over the last week. And at first it was as amazing as she thought it would be, standing with her peers with a large adoring crowd clapping and cheering them all on as Mike introduced them along with Hawks. Hawks! She didn't know one of the top 10 would be here, but it would only bring even more eyes towards them today once they got out. Then, as if the day couldn't get any better, their umpire was Deku. Deku-Sensei had been the best person on staff, though everyone would know she's biased on this matter. But she wasn't the only person who thought that, not by a mile. Most of her class saw him in between classes, and she had run into more than one kid from the other courses going to see him and had even made polite conversation with him from time to time. But Rinko might be his biggest fan amongst the students. The guy was just the best to everyone. She knew Deku-Sensei constantly helped explain everything to their quiet classmate Gromova and gave people advice for their quirks like other people breathe. And she had received a lot herself with Deku-Sensei aiding her with ways to deal with her vertigo and writing up the paperwork so she could wear the gloves she had on now without any fear of hurting anyone. So she was super happy to see the guy up there. He absolutely would be the fairest out of all the teachers, and with the stupid things they were saying about Deku-Sensei, most of which was very unfair. It felt so cool that they were giving him the honor of being the umpire. But that happiness was quickly stripped from her. The silence following Deku-Sensei's introduction was deafening, and Rinko's eyes looked around in complete confusion at the heroes around her. Why weren't they cheering for Deku-Sensei? Or at least clapping for him if they weren't all that impressed with a civilian, because Deku-Sensei was still someone very impressive in his own right. Then, the muttering started. Gromova's ears twitched and folded back somewhat along with all of the other students she could see and knew had good hearing had their faces scrunched up. Rinko couldn't hear what was being said as well as the others, but there were people that were loud enough for the message to be clear. They didn't want Deku-Sensei to be here because he didn't have a quirk. Her mind raced. It had taken a minute for this fact to truly sink in for her. The idea that there wasn't one person in the crowd of heroes that could respect the guy, not one who seemed to approve of her favorite teacher being here, was somewhat chilling at first. But then she was angry and clenched her fists. How dare they? What right did they have to look down on Deku-Sensei? And Rinko was glad she had spoken her mind to those idiots in the stands and pointed out their bigotry. She was even prouder of herself when all her year mates began cheering for her and clapping, and so glad that they were behind her. The pledge to not use her quirk would probably lower her chances of finding a good placement later, but she'd keep to it. Rinko also didn't know if her classmates would not use their quirks, but given their response to her speech, at least one of them would. But she had to put her thoughts aside as Deku-Sensei began speaking again, and she listened intently as he explained the rules until the ground opened up. The stage fell away as 11 different roundabouts rose in their place. Each one a different color and almost comically large compared to the ones she had seen at playgrounds before now, with many more bars and padding on each of them. "All right, kids, come up and get one," Deku-Sensei loudly called out as he jumped up onto the middle one with a box, with the mentioned wristbands likely inside of it. Rinko happily got in line for hers, and Deku-Sensei instructed her to go to the red roundabout, where she saw most of the people in her class were now. After she got herself up, Rinko looked at her wristband. Hers was cyan, and looked around the grounds to find the roundabout she needed to get to. Unfortunately, the roundabouts were placed by color order, and the cyan one was across the field with nearly every other roundabout in her way. Okay, that will take some time to get to once everything gets started. And that's the last of the little students. Is everyone ready to go? Mike questioned, getting a round of cheers from the students, causing the man to laugh. Well, you heard them, folks. Let the event begin, Mike exclaimed, and Rinko had to grab a hold of the nearest handrail bars. Oh, this was way faster than Rinko thought the roundabouts would go at the beginning, and she now understood this wouldn't be as easy as she expected it to be. Swallowing the lump in her throat, she glanced around looking for the green roundabout, since that one was the first one on her way to the cyan roundabout, slowly making her way to the edge of the roundabout and preparing herself to jump. It took about 4 spins before she decided to risk her jump and launched off the roundabout, falling and scrambling to grab at the bar with half her body hanging off the roundabout. Thank goodness the roundabouts were covered in this soft and squishy material. If they were anything else, Rinko and the others would probably hurt themselves by jumping like this. Pulling herself up, she had to admit she was starting to get dizzy from all of the spinning, which wasn't helping her find the next roundabout she needed to jump on next, which was the purple one. Rinko was just about to jump when someone kicked her from behind, a soft screech of terror from her lips as she fell off. No! She cried, about to hit the ground when someone grabbed a hold of her ankle, and though the sharp tug probably dislocated it, she wasn't out of the game because of the person who grabbed her. Rinko flailed for a second as she was brought up to the roundabout, and she quickly clung to the first bar she could feel and tried to breathe. The whiplash of it all made her heart do flips and nearly brought her stomach to empty itself with how turned around and dizzy she felt. "Are you good?" Someone close to her, likely the one who grabbed her, asked. She turned her head and peeked open one of her eyes and saw a flash of purple before it got too much for her head, and she closed her eyes to maybe help with her dizziness. "Mostly, thanks for the save," Rinko answered, swearing that she could feel the roundabouts speeding up. "No problem. Are you heading to Cyan too?" the person asked, and Rinko nodded. "Cool. Truce until the second round," the person offered afterwards. Rinko opened her eyes, and though her vision was still swimming, she could make out the purple clawed hand held out to her. Rinko took it and shook truce, she promised. "Great, we'll have to jump to the black one before we can get to the cyan one. Think you can handle it?" her partner asked, and Rinko nodded, looking around until she spotted the one mentioned and saw. They were going much faster now. "Let's jump on 3, okay? 1, 2, 3. They shouted, and Rinko did her best to leap off of the roundabout with just the one foot, managing to get on just the edge again, and her partner had to tug her the rest of the way by the arm and hugged her close, and Rinko was glad they didn't dislocate her arm this time. She also noted that her partner was way taller than she was. She sharply inhaled once she felt her quirk automatically trigger itself without her consent, and she felt a moment of brief fear. "Oof. Geez, Deku-Sensei was right. Your quirk does pack a punch," her partner said, and she immediately looked up to her partner and saw a wide pair of fishy green eyes and a toothy smile above her. "How?" Rinko tried to question. Deku-Sensei was the only person who hadn't been affected by her quirk before. "I got blubber from my quirk, and that stuff absorbs a lot of damage regardless of type." The person answered. "Now come on. We should get a cyan before the roundabouts get even faster again," they told her. "All right." Rinko agreed as she turned around to look at the stuff around them, and she felt her guts twist since the things around them were a bit too blurred for her to safely judge when she should jump to get to the brief flash of cyan. The fact her arms were starting to ache from holding on to the spinning roundabouts also wasn't helping matters. "Okay, this is going to be way tougher of a jump. I think you should wrap your arms around my neck," her partner suggested, and Rinko would have argued about it, but even she didn't trust herself to make this jump. So, with some shuffling, she got into a kind of side piggyback and tensed as her partner got ready to jump again. She really hoped that they didn't miss, because padded ground or not, the crash would probably hurt from how fast they were going. Then before she knew it, her partner leapt, and Rinko couldn't help a tiny yelp as they did. And there was a metal creak when they landed, and her dizziness super didn't like the new wobble of the roundabout they were on. "Hey, we're here, just need to crawl to the middle and stay on until time runs out now," her partner commented, and Rinko moved to grip the handlebars instead. And somehow this part of the work seemed more daunting than the jumping had been. "Do you want some help up?" her partner asked, and Rinko shook her head. "No, gotta do this on my own," she replied, gritting her teeth as she prepared herself to reach for the set of bars in front of her. See, with how fast the roundabouts were now, they were essentially gravity wells, except without the walls to keep them from flying away like the rides did. So it was with great effort that she balanced herself and moved to reach for the next layer of bars closer to the middle, her arms aching something terrible as she struggled to keep a hold of the bars. If she kept this pace up, she'd never make it to the middle before time was called. Getting an idea from something she heard somewhere, Rinko moved around so that she could instead use her legs to reach for the next set of bars. Asterisk, just one more to go, and then you can touch the middle. Asterisk, Rinko promised herself, and thankfully, she didn't have to struggle as much since the distance was smaller. Now within arm's reach, Rinko struck her hand with the wristband out and heard a small beep and allowed herself to relax some. She'd just need to focus on staying on now. And with how fast it was going, she doubted anyone would try to knock her off instead of trying to hold on to the roundabout. Just to be safe, though, Rinko slipped back to the third set of bars, so she wouldn't be in the way of someone else. Hopefully, this would be over soon, though. She didn't know how much longer she could be spun around until she threw up. Oof. That's the third person to yak up. Really hope we don't get that when we have our first festival. Awakuin commented, nose scrunching up as if he could smell the puke from all the way up here. To be fair to him, though, Achiko also thought she could smell it too, though. That should be impossible with how far away they were from the field. And having dealt with a lot of nausea from her quirk, she had to agree with the statement. It wasn't much fun puking, and she was sure that a doctor would be concerned over the damage to her throat she managed to do over the years of trying to train her quirk. Well, that was before Izuku helped her learn to counterbalance the nausea. Achiko didn't think that she'd ever stop cursing herself for not realizing that she could make things heavier, because it fixed the whole issue with using her quirk on herself. As Izuku had said before, quirks normally bend the rules of the universe and very rarely break them outright, and her quirk wasn't one of those exceptions, hence her nausea. "Hey, you okay, Yukai?" Gigi quietly asked, and she blinked. "Huh? Yeah. Why do you ask?" she questioned, and the small hand mouth pursed its lips. "You've been quieter since Izuku's entrance," Gigi answered, and Achiko's chest felt constricted at the reminder. She ducked her head. That moment was such a chilling one for her. Izuku always joked about himself being dismissed because he was quirkless, something that hadn't really made sense. But if how the crowd reacted was anything to go by, Achiko felt a lump form in her throat at just how bad could the discrimination get. "Yukai," Gigi repeated, and she gave him a smile and dismissively waved her hands. "I'm fine, Gigi. Just wasn't expecting that," Achiko admitted dejectedly. The small hand mouth nodded in turn. "I assumed that Mito-kun had been troubled by others for his lack of quirk, but this was surreal," Gigi confessed to her. Achiko's shoulders slumped hearing that. It was probably very naive of her to not even consider that people would bully Izuku for that. She's seen some of the girls at school bully others for their quirks before, but she just hadn't made the next logical step that the lack of one would be considered worst. Awakuin gave a hum, having heard them apparently, and scoffed as he leaned back in his seat on the other side of her. "All the more we'll shine once we hit the ground. Though to be fair, it won't be strong to outshine those dumbass," Awakuin said, jutting his chin as he spat the second part, as he put his hands behind his head. Both she and Gigi stiffened at that remark, and Achiko couldn't stop herself from scowling as she remembered the girl with rainbow arms, because though she hadn't known the girl very well, she had become the face Achiko had come to associate the event with the most. Better than the fire or the people who had been badly injured that day. But either way, Achiko mentally found herself back to that day. She was at the shrine with Gigi, Awakuin, and Izuku. It is then with disgust that she looked up in the stands. Dozens of heroes she couldn't help recognizing, and her nose scrunched up. A renewed fire beginning to boil her BLD eyes had tried to keep them from being too jaded with heroics, often giving them examples of the heroes that he felt were the good ones. She was very glad her personal hero 13 was on that list, but that was beside the point. Cause as much as Izuku tried, Achiko couldn't help noticing how much more jaded she was of things now, even being to the point that she knew that she was unrealistic to the people around her, especially heroes. Every time she saw a hero in an advertisement or on a commercial, she'd easily figured out how much money the hero would make for royalties and compare them to how much more she knew Izuku was doing for others with so much less money. Shaking her head, Achiko forcibly turned her attention back to her friend Awakuin. "I think a 3-day-old glow stick could outshine most of them," she spitefully added, and Awakuin began chuckling along with Bakugu. She mentally preened at that, since that was Bakugu's way of saying, "Nice one, new Neff." Tokoyami and Suddy, however, looked very shocked at her scathing comment, which surprised her at first. Then she remembered that the two would be less likely to know anything about what happened at the South Side, by only being a friend of a friend. From that point of view, her comment definitely would seem very out of nowhere, especially to other aspiring heroes that were less jaded than she and her friends were by now. Embarrassed at letting the comment slip, now she turned away and rubbed one of her arms, the different texture of the glove she was wearing helping to take her mind off it. She heard the snort of Bakugo before the boy spoke up. Don't look so shocked, Muppets. Most folks in heroics have been feeding us a load of CRP long before now. And like the ill beach down there, I ain't the only person willing to say it. Bakugo said, and the pair shyly ducked their heads. Gigi reached a hand over and lightly patted Tokoyami's back. Don't feel so bad about it. Mito-kun has his starstruck moments still with heroes. Gigi told them, and Achiko couldn't help smiling as the boy did. Gigi had become much more comfortable in the role of comforting others since the fire. The kids at the community center had been a real help to boost Gigi's confidence in the area. She wondered for a moment if Gigi had ever considered being a rescue hero like she wanted to be. With the track of thought now in mind, she tried to remember if any of them talked about what kind of heroes she and her friends wanted to be. She didn't have the best memory for these kinds of things, but thought that she would have remembered that at least. Hey guys, Achiko called, getting their attention, and quickly glanced at the field to see if they were still busy and that they wouldn't miss anything. Yeah, Newton F. Bakugo replied, not bothering to lean forward and see her. I never asked before, but what kind of heroes do you want to be? I'm planning on a branch of rescue work, but what about you guys? Achiko asked, getting around to blinking from others. Oh yeah, we haven't talked about this yet. I think I'm going to be a supporter on the underground circuit, could probably go frontline combat, but I don't think I got the mental constitution for it. Awakuen offered up. Achiko tilted her head at the thought, but couldn't think of a reason to argue with her friend's choice. Fumi and I were thinking of going underground, Suddy said next, and Achiko nodded. She could easily see them being a great asset to the underground, especially in the ops section specifically. I probably should go underground myself, Gigi said musingly and raising his arms, likely re-fencing his quirk, but Achiko couldn't help balking at the way he said it. Should nothing, Gigi. You'd be great in most branches of heroics, especially as an auxiliary hero. Achiko heatedly argued, shooting to her feet to further argue her case, as if the added height would help her in some way. Gigi looked shocked by her outburst, and the parts of his face that were visible turned pinkish before Gigi hit his face. Normally, she might turn bashful after such an outburst since there were other people to overhear her, but like hell was she just going to let Gigi dog himself? Not today, not after what happened not even half an hour earlier, and especially not because of all the stupid negative labels forcibly attached to him because of what his quirk made him look like. She might have let herself be blindsided by the hatred of the quirkless, but she wasn't going to let anyone stop her from acting against this and defending her friends against the discrimination. Planned on being a line holder, Bakugo added, breaking the silence that had formed and regaining the attention of the group back to what they were talking about. And what? Suddy questioned. They and Tokoyami were both confused by the term. They're people that hold off villains, a mix of combat and support heroes. They usually keep villains busy, so people can evacuate civilians or keep them from doing more damage. Think of Crimson Rye from a couple decades ago. He was one of the biggest line holders. Achiko answered, having remembered Izuku's explanation on the other types of hero when she first asked. The pair nodded, either knowing the hero or understanding what she meant either way. Bakugo-san would best make merry in the trenches of sheer chaos. Tokoyami commented almost musingly so. Achiko blinked, shocked by the odd words of the boy. Bakugo at the least didn't seem offended and snorted, throwing his head back slightly, like he didn't want to laugh outright. Awakuen didn't have the same reservations. Dude, do you always talk like that? Awakuen said, chuckling, and Tokoyami ducked his head bashfully. Hey, it ain't bad. Just want to make sure my goofy but doesn't offend you when I laugh, because there's no way I'm going to be able to keep a straight face if you keep that SHD up. Awakuen quickly cleared up. I know, right? Fumi here should try to be a comedian on the side. Suddy exclaimed, moving to glomp their twin from the side. Suddy, Tokoyami hissed, likely embarrassed. Bakugo shrugged, rolling his eyes. I paid to see you squawk on stage, Patchy. Bakugo added, and Tokoyami's head whipped around towards the red-eyed boy, surprised. Bakugo scared and turned his head away. I said what I said. Bakugo gruffly told the boy. Suddy chirped loudly and moved to hug Bakugo tightly. The boy surprisingly didn't fight the embrace, and Achiko thought that he was merely acting grumpy since he didn't actually move to push the shadow being away and even wrapped an arm around them. Achiko had to resist the urge to squeal at the sight. An angsty person and a cheerful person getting together. That kind of couple, romantic or not, was a guilty pleasure of hers to watch whenever it came up in the media. And she really could use something light after all of the depressing quirk discrimination stuff. Alrighty, little listeners, I think that all the kiddos moving on are ready to get back into the thick of it, and the field has been cleaned up now, Mike said, bringing everyone's attention back to Festival. They're a tenacious bunch of ankle-biters, aren't they? Hawks joked. That they are, but I'm not sure how they'll deal with what's coming next, especially with their pledge of not using their quirks. Mike pointed out, well, we won't know until the next event is picked, Mike. So what do you say you show us what these kids have to deal with next, Midoriya-san? Hawks replied, and sure enough, Izuku was down on the field on the stage once again. The event wheel is spun once again, eventually landing on one of the events, and Mike squealed with happiness. And Achiko and many others clutched their ears from the sound. Sorry for the feedback there, folks, but as I think everyone knows, Scavenger Pack is my favorite of the second round events. Mike apologized. If I go deaf over this, I'm sending you the bill, Michael. Hawks pointedly said in response, making Mike laugh some more. I'll be sure to add it to the pile. Mike answered, and Achiko wondered if that was a joke or not, because as nice as present Mike was, she could see the man accidentally making others deaf. May I explain the rules to the kids now? Izuku questioned with his arms crossed from what Achiko could see. Go ahead, Midoriya-san. Hawks encouraged. Right? Scavenger Pack is a game that needs teams of 3. Each person will have a specific role in the game. Izuku started to describe. One will be the carrier, someone that will be responsible for keeping the group's loot safe. One will be the thief, who will steal from other groups. And one will be the collector that will have the list of items the group will need to collect for the group to move forward to the one-on-ones. Izuku said the 3 roles with their own silhouettes. The entire game revolves around each group collecting a list of items. They're little plastic replicas like this. Izuku told them, holding up a small, solid red plastic rabbit that would fit in the palm of his hand. The list will include what items to find and what color the item has to be. Izuku further explained. They'll again have 10 minutes to gather these items from the many different areas around the arena where the items are located. The 5 groups with the most items will move on, with the 6th highest score able to send only one of their members forward. Izuku elaborated. Students will be allowed 5 minutes to form their groups and who will play what role in the game. Then given both a grab bag and this list reader. Izuku finished off, showing both items for the crowd. Now find yourself some teammates, kids. Izuku encouraged the kids before all of the screens took on a timer face. Sophia curled her tail around herself as she gazed around the other students, quickly finding them forming teams around her. She wasn't sure she'd be able to get into one as easily. Sure, all of the hero course had managed to move on, but the language barrier and her mouth would cause her problems. So, she planned to move back and wait for the time to end and just take whatever role she was left with in the end. She only paused when she heard someone call out what she had come to understand was the Japanese version of her name and turned her head around. Haku, her classmate, fast approaching and waving one of her hands, likely trying to get her attention. Sophia blinked, surprised to see the girl do so, even more so than when she showed up to class with her hair dyed black. Haku had a fear of spiders, something the whole class learned during one of their hero classes in the fake cities, and her mouth probably would remind the girl of a spider, what with it being segmented like. Haku, however, babbled excitedly at her before grabbing her by the hand and dragged her off towards the center of the arena, and completely taken off guard, Sophia couldn't stop the other girl from taking her away from where she was. It took a few moments before they ended up next to a large girl with aquatic traits, and almost the same shade of purple, the girl grinning at her with a wide row of mismatched and pointed teeth. The girl began to speak, but it all went in one ear and out one ear, since she still didn't know enough Japanese to understand what she was saying. Haku elbowed the girl, and likely explained the fact she didn't know Japanese. The other girl blinked her large fishy eyes, then tapped her chin with a hum before turning back to Sophia once again. Do you happen to know any English? The girl said, and her ears shot up. She was surprised but nodded, making the girl grin once again, while Haku's mouth fell open. You know English. Why didn't anyone say so? Ugh, we could have been talking way before now. Haku complained, throwing her hands up in exasperation. Sophia stared at the girl. She hadn't been hiding her proficiency in English aside from her not speaking at all, which was probably why the girl didn't know. Anyways, Gromova, Haku said slowly, saying her name rather unsure until Sophia nodded. We were hoping that we could be a team together, with you being the carrier, Haku told her. Sophia looked between the two girls and pointed to herself, tilting her head to emphasize the silent question of me. Yeah, you go pretty fast during hero classes, so you'd be a great carrier, Gromova, Haku replied, shrugging her shoulders. Sophia scratched behind her ear a little flustered, not having been complimented often, but ultimately nodded, agreeing to be their teammate. The two girls cheered, and Sophia was even further surprised as they both hugged her. And while the contact wasn't fully pleasant, Sophia was glad the other purple girl wasn't slimly to the touch like she had feared. Slime was such a hassle to clean off, and she probably wouldn't be able to get it out until after the festival was over. Great. I'll tell Deku-Sensei we're a group, Haku said, running off to the middle of the arena and getting in line to register. So are you mute? Cause Haku said, you don't really talk much. The girl asked curiously, and Sophia reluctantly shook her head. Huh. Are you a quirk mute then? The girl questioned, tilting her head confused, and Sophia blinked her eyes. You know, can't talk without triggering your quirk, PRD, the girl clarified, and again Sophia shook her head. Oh, okay. The girl replied, thankfully not sticking to the point for long before offering her clawed hand. I forgot to introduce myself earlier. I'm Machida AI, the girl said. Sophia hesitated, but shook her hand. This had been the first time she could recall interacting with someone like this on her own. And while she didn't know where to go from there since she didn't exactly talk much and didn't feel the pressing need to try. Even if AI, no, they go by last names here, Machida seemed to have her own set of unsettling teeth like herself. There was a difference between too many teeth and a jaw that basically unhinged like snakes did. However, before the silence could go on for too long, Haku returned and had both the bright red bag and the list reader in hand, though the list reader looked like a phone of sorts in her eyes. Okay, here's your bag, Gromova. It has backpack straps, Haku said as she put it into her hands. Then the reader over to Machida, much to her confusion, since Machida probably would be a better thief, if anything else, since she'd probably be able to overpower anyone smaller than herself. Seeing her confusion, the two decided to explain themselves on that part. Oh right, I'm going to be the thief since I don't have a lot of experience with phones, and I'm not so sure I won't overload it by accident with my quirk. Can't turn that part of it off, you know, Haku told her bashfully as she rubbed the back of her neck. I don't mind though, we can handle this either way, but considering the thief role, I'm going to guess that even if there are different colored versions of the same items, there will only be one of each in that color, so we might have to steal them from others if we can't find the item in time. Machida pointed out to them, and they'll try to steal from us too, so should we split up or stay together to better protect our chances? Haku reasoned out, crossing her arms. Sophia thought about it, and she found the idea strong to give an exact right answer. If they stayed together, she'd have a bit more protection with the two there beside her. It would also be easier to overwhelm someone to get more items. But splitting up would let her run more freely without having to stick close to her teammates, and they'd have the chance to gather more items freely since they would be able to do so without worrying about watching over her at the same time. What do you think, Gromova? Machida asked. Sophia folded her ears back somewhat, wondering how she was supposed to answer without knowing anything about JSL. Thankfully, she wouldn't have to speak either, since she could scratch out her answer in the dirt of the arena, which was exactly what she did with one of the talons on her feet. Since she still didn't know the kanji needed to get her point across, she drew the three of their faces, hers being off to the side and a thick line between her and them, then a slimmer line connecting the other two. Do you want us to go on our own and work together and leave you alone? Haku asked after blinking a couple of times. Sophia nodded, and Machida looked at her concerned. Are you sure you'll be okay on your own? The other teams will definitely start to pick off the people on their own later on in the event. Machida questioned, concern for her, but Haku huffed, bemused. Hey, if Gromova says she can handle it, then she can. I've seen her in training, and she could do a lot, with or without her quirk. Haku defended, then bumped shoulders with Sophia. But if you do need help, just shout, okay? Machida can hear really good, Haku said before turning back to Machida. Does it say what we're looking for first? Haku inquired. A white ice cream cone? Machida answered, showing the screen, which had a picture of the item too. Cool. We'll see you later, Gromova. Better to cover more ground now to find more stuff. Haku told her before rushing off with Machida, which was probably an odd sight since this was a team event. Sophia tried to not get too caught up by that and just slung the bag over her shoulder, then left for the corners of the arena, hoping to keep from being that close to the others when this all started. It wouldn't be for much longer, so she crouched down and waited for the eventual alarm to tell her when the event started, remaining unaffected by the people eyeing her up. A large chunk of the groups wasn't from the hero course, so was to be expected, she supposed, since they wouldn't know what she was capable of yet. Most of the ones from her class didn't think to give her a second glance before turning back to their teammates. Watching passively as the robots placed different barrels all over along with chests and dozens of holes opening in the stadium walls, all likely full of plastic items for them to collect. She didn't have to wait long, and the alarm blared a minute later, and she didn't hesitate to spring forward as soon as heard it, easily clearing well over 50 feet in only a few seconds, much to the shock of the other courses. She could hear Mike-sensei speaking, but didn't pause in her stride, easily crossing the field in leaps and bounds, dodging and swerving between other teams as she did. It wasn't until she heard the call of Haku, Gromova, I found it, did she change direction. Sophia easily turned on her heel with her 4 feet on the floor and ran directly over to Haku and let the girl place the plastic treat in her bag before taking off as she had before. This pattern served them well, as they collected 20 items without much trouble. A few people tried to grab her, but usually weren't capable of keeping up with her, much less actually laying a hand on her. It wasn't until around the halfway point that someone finally tripped her up. One of the support course kids must have done it too. 1 second she was running, and the next something wrapped around her leg, and she crashed to the ground strong. Whipping her head around, she saw that her left leg was caught up in a net, and there was a cheer from a boy nearby, along with a couple of others. Sophia tried to tear through the net with her claws, but even with both hands she was struggling to get it done, and the boy was coming right up to her. Panicking, there wasn't much she could do. Both Machida and Haku were too far away to help her even if she called for them, and the boy wasn't likely to leave her with her bag, and there was no way she'd cut through the net in time to get away. With the boy now in arm's reach, she did the only thing she could think of and turned her head toward the boy and opened her maw to its full extent while hissing. The boy, very understandably, screamed and fell on his butt at the sight, something that gave her a few more precious seconds to tear through the net. She wasn't free of the net, but not stuck to the ground either, and without thinking about it, she ran away as fast as she could. The net might slow her down, but that was better than losing their whole haul. But she'd have to be more careful as she ran around the field to keep from getting really trapped a second time. That being said, Sophia couldn't help pressing her ears flat against her skull, because even if it was necessary to move on, she didn't feel right with scaring someone with her mouth like she had. Hopefully she hadn't traumatized the boy too badly. She might not be inside the school and hang out with the other students often, but she also didn't need the rest of the students looking at her like some of her old classmates did. Thankfully for Hawks, things seemed to be going his way for the most part recently. Mike did have room for a co-host like him during the sports festival. Apparently the man was taken aback, because usually he was the one asking people to co-host with him. He wasn't sure why. Commentating with Mike sounded like fun, and if it was anything like being on Hands Up Radio, then it would be fun. Though the live commentary for an international audience would probably intimidate most, Hawks had to admit he could understand how most people wouldn't be too keen in that case. He only got used to public speaking with the commission teaching him how to for years. Of course, once he got out of the station and home, again to the penthouse, one of his handlers were waiting for him for an in-person debriefing, since that always happened when he went dark on them. It took him some blustering, but he was able to avoid giving away why he agreed so readily to leaving his wings fully behind and telling them that he asked Mike to co-host the first year's sports festival, which made the woman they sent scowl at him. Not that she could argue with what he had done. The publicity would be fantastic. He'd get an up-close look at the new kids of the year, and he was doing it to fulfill his mission to get close to Deku-Sensei. Deku-Sensei would be there at the festival after all, and it would be a lot easier to talk to the boy then, instead of randomly picking up teaching in the middle of nowhere or faking an accident to get close to the boy. Not that he'd need to do either, but Hawks didn't want to wait until the next time they were supposed to meet either, which was what led him to sharing this booth with Mike now. To be honest, Hawks couldn't believe the scale of the festival when he arrived. He hadn't watched it in earnest since he got acquired by the Commission. He was far too busy training to be a hero himself at the time, and the Commission would show him any students or fights of interest, so it wasn't like he missed out on anything. But he supposed it was a long enough time for cognitive dissonance of sorts to build, and he was a bit startled by just how strong UA was going for this festival. The stadium they were in was utterly massive in scale, and there were 3 of them as he learned from Mike, each placed so that they were far enough to not interfere with the other 2, which left him gobsmacked because that felt like so much for just one day, only a year. Well, it did until Mike explained the noise issue, and when the crowd started cheering, Hawks, despite being in a soundproof booth, had to concede Mike had a very good point that someone with super hearing might have the serious risk of going deaf if the stadium got any louder. However, once he saw Zuri down on stage, as the umpire, Hawks couldn't help thinking that it would be worth it and had to work very strong to keep his wings from flapping. He was so wrapped up in seeing Zuri live that he completely spaced out the pin drop silence before Zuri mentioned it. Hawks wasn't sure if his lack of shock over his fellow hero's actions was a good thing or a bad thing. At least he stopped himself from showing his anger visibility this time. For the most part, it wasn't like anyone, but Mike could see him nearly crushing the armrests of his chair. Haku and all the kids down there had earned his favor, though, during her speech, and he had to admit to mentally cheering her on the whole time. Shame he wouldn't be able to offer her anything in an internship, or he would have that second with the help of Mike. Though no one could stop him from keeping a watchful eye on her during the rest of the festival, making her way through both rounds without her quirk, just as she promised, the second of which was just coming to a close in 3, 2, 1, and time. Everyone stop. Mike called out before hitting a button, causing a loud ringing and the flash of some red lights. That's the end of the game, and we'll have to count how many items each team has managed to collect before we see who gets to move on to the last round. Mike announced to the stage. Any favors, Hawks? Mike asked, leaning over towards him to bump shoulders. Hawks couldn't help grinning back, loving the minor but frequent contact Mike gave him each time they worked together. Everyone was usually so stuffy, but it was nice to have someone that would do this every once in a while. I'd have to say Haku's team. Those girls did well during both events, especially Gromova. It's pronounced Gromova, right? Hawks replied, and Mike nodded. They have been impressive, and I'm hoping Chun and her team also goes forward. Mike said as he brought up the footage of the rose girl with shiny legs, the lion and redhead boy with bulging eyes and weird prongs on his head. Hawks nodded his head. The team had also got his eye for being Team Shiny. Chin's legs aside, the lion kid made light, and the other boy had some nice green glowing going on, and the boy had been the one that really caught his attention too. The boy Goldman might make a good intern from what Mike had told him. Goldman hadn't used his quirk yet, likely one of the ones swearing off using it for the day, but Mike said the kid had been able to figure out to hover with his quirk and the help of some support gear. So Hawks was already looking forward to sending the boy a request once this was all over. They did good too. Crossing my wings, they'd both make it through to the finals. Hawks responded. You know we're supposed to be impartial as commentators, Hawks. Mike jokingly pointed out, and Hawks huffed back, bumping the back of Mick's chair with his wing. You're their teacher. You have to be. I don't, and can have all the favorites I want. Hawks replied, sticking his tongue out, and Mike made an affronted gasp as he put a hand over his heart. Hawks knew this kind of playfulness wouldn't normally be allowed, but the carefreeness would likely be hand-waved away with Mike being a similarly carefree dude. That being said, Hawks knew better than to go over the top with it. Especially not with the Commission watching. Oh, looks like the final numbers are in, little listeners. Do me a favor and read the results out of everyone watching at home, Hawks. Mike encouraged, and he nodded, taking the little tablet Mike had been reading from a second ago. No problem, Mike, he said, skimming all the way back to the top of the page. In first place, we have Team Chun with a grand whopping 78 items on their list in their bag. Major props, their kiddos. Hawks told the crowd with a wink as the kids, or more like Chun, jumped up and began celebrating their win. Not that far behind, we have Team Haku with 67 goods in second. Congrats, and heading to the finals, girls. Hawks praised, secretly proud of the 3 making it that far. Anyone that defended Zuri was automatically a friend in his book. In third, we've got a team from the support course. Team Sada has 50 listed items in their bag. Not bad, kids. Not bad. Hawks complimented. Then it looks like 4th and 5th place tied with 42 each. So both Team FA Ling from Gen Ed and the 3 of 1B will be coming back for the next round, folks. Hawks said, almost pursing his lips when he noticed the crowd had finally chosen to start clapping again. No doubt because the latter of the two were from the hero course. And for our squeaker candidate, it looks like we'll be taking someone from Team Yukino. Need any time to pick, or okay, then looks like they already have someone in mind then. Hawks said, the two boys with the girl from the hero course immediately refusing from what he could tell as they pushed the girl forward towards the other teams that had one. So, I'm guessing that the team's namesake Yukino shall continue on. Hawks continued saying, Yukino at least didn't seem upset by her teammates brushing her off, discounting the playful chokehold she put one of the boys into before they got away from her. Quite the lineup we got there. Mike commented, though his body showed disappointment that the man hadn't voiced for some reason. Hawks quirked an eyebrow at that. Most of the hero course had made it to the last round, so why was he hung up on the roster? Well then, let's see which of the kiddos are going against who before we cut to the commercial break. Mike said before Hawks could really think on the matter and took the tablet back from him to do something with it. Then a second later hit some buttons and a bracket came up on the screen. And there it is, folks. Get a good long look there. We got to get started on building the games for intermission, which we'll dive right into once you get back from our sponsors, little listeners. See you then. Mike told the audience, then cut the feed and dolled out orders to the rest of the staff like he had between the other rounds. After which he fully muted his headset and leaned back with a boneless oof. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm feeling peckish. Want to come down to the break room and get something to eat, kiddo? Mike offered, jabbing a thumb at the door. Hawks thought about turning down the offer like he usually would in this circumstance. Being around meat right now would probably make him drool, and the commission would definitely take issue with that. But on the other hand, he'd be more likely to run into Zuri if he wasn't cooped up in the commoner booth. And with that prospect in mind, Hawks' decision was made for him. Yeah, could go for a cart of watermelons right about now. Hawks answered, pulling the headset down to hang around his neck as he got up from his chair. Mike blinked and laughed a bit awkwardly. Don't think I've heard that one before. Most people say they'd eat a whole cow or something. Mike commented. Hawks sighed inside his head. He really hated that line and was convinced the commission only came up with it to make him more miserable. I am a vegetarian, don't really do the eating animals thing. Hawks pointed out, and Mike more or less nodded at his statement, and not really questioning it further as they started walking out and into the halls. Hawks waited until they got to a restroom and made his excuses to Mike about needing it, promising that he wouldn't get lost, and that Mike didn't have to wait for him and should go on and save him some of the fruit. Successfully separating himself from Mike, Hawks didn't hesitate to start walking through the halls, ears peaked, and eyes peeled for any trace of Zuri anywhere through the halls. Surely Zuri would also need a break and would be around here somewhere, right? But the stadium was massive, and there were no doubt dozens of hallways. Maybe he should send out some of his feathers to get a wider search going. No, that plan was quickly thrown aside as soon as it was made. What would he even say if he got caught doing that? Sorry, Nizu, but I got lost. Yeah, right, like the little mammal would by that. And with how reluctant Nizu was with letting the commission staff on the grounds, Hawks couldn't risk making the mammal suspicious of him. Hawks paused in a hallway after he moved to a hallway above the inner tunnel system with windows to look out at the field as some of the staff put together some field equipment. Maybe Zuri was down there. He was the type to help out with things like that after all, but how would he talk his way into helping out down there if Zuri was? Hearing someone's approaching footsteps around a corner, Hawks quickly checked his watch and almost frowned when he saw he'd been gone for long enough for Mike to probably come looking for him, and readied himself. A nice people-pleasing lopsided grin on his face, and he turned to the person ready to ask for some directions, or apologize for getting lost if it was Mike, only to pause as he came face-to-face with Zuri. Time seemed to freeze as Hawk's heart leapt right up into his throat as he finally saw Zuri for the first time since he was sent away for retraining how long ago? 2 weeks. 3. Hawks wasn't sure that was the right amount of time. Either way, it was far too long in his mind, and he immediately wanted to jump across the distance, then start cuddling Zuri and apologizing for being so stupid and ghosting him. And however, the next second Hawks reeled himself in and remembered where he was and what he was doing, giving himself a firm reminder that he wasn't Tweety right now, and that Zuri wasn't Zuri either. He was Hawks, and Zuri was Deku-Sensei. Two people who have never met before in any way, shape, or form. So, Hawks beamed at the kid and let his head fall to the side before he spoke up. "Oh, hey, a kid, Midoriya-san, right? Mix told me a lot about you," Hawks said, trying to come off as causal as he put his hands in his pockets and walked up to Zuri. "Not every day you meet someone as well-read and so young at the same time, but where are my manners? I'm sure you probably heard Mike introducing me earlier, but that's hardly a real introduction, so let's just start from the beginning. I'm Dash," Hawks told the boy as he walked up, only to stop when Zuri interrupted him. "Hawks," Zuri plainly said, staring up at him, a soft yet mostly natural smile on his face, his tone neither impolite nor overly friendly. For a second, Hawks' mind stalled, and worry gripped him. Had he been too late? Did Zuri already make up his mind and think that Hawks was done with him? But before Hawks could spiral more, Zuri's smile warmed up considerably, and he offered up one of his hands for him to shake. "I'm Midoriya Izuku, and it's a pleasure to meet you." And despite the lightness of the tone, Hawks could feel the real weight of those words as he looked into Zuri's eyes. "I'm so glad to see you again," they warmly said somehow. Hawks' lip trembled, but he kept his composure. Hawks gripped the photo in his pocket, then carefully brought it and his hand out of his pocket and took Zuri's hand. Hawks watched a brief flicker of confusion try and tug on Zuri's face when their hands meet, but Zuri schooled his face even faster than Hawks thought a person could do such a thing. "The pleasure's all mine, little buddy," Hawks said back, silently willing his face to somehow convey how he felt the same way Zuri had just moments ago. "I missed you too," he hoped the boy heard. He saw Zuri's eyes soften and almost melt, it seemed, and Hawks fought to keep his wings from fluttering at the sight, because Zuri must have got the message. Zuri took his hand back along with the picture tucked away behind his back as he held both behind himself, mostly likely clasped together. "Sorry to cut this short, but there's only a couple more minutes until the games are ready, and I need to use the bathroom before then." Zuri politely excused himself. Hawks waved a hand. "Of course, Midoriya-san. Talk with you next time," Hawks said, and the boy nodded. "Sure, Hawks-san," Zuri answered, throwing him one last blinding smile over his shoulder before leaving Hawks on his own in the hall. Hawks waved the boy off his hand, hanging in the air once the boy was out of sight, a crashing wave of relief soothing the ache that had built in his chest, and for the first time that he could ever recall in his life. Hawks' chest felt lighter than it had in years. Having completed his goal, Hawks turned on his heel and made for the commoner booth, easily finding his way since he'd left a feather there and began a homing on it. Thank you for joining us on this journey through what if Villain Deku became a teacher at U.A. We hope you found it as captivating as we did. A big thank you to Bloomerbill for creating such an engaging story. Don't forget to visit their profile on fanfiction.net for more fantastic works. The link is in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Zenin Fanfics for more intriguing explorations into fanfiction and fantasy. Your support helps us create more content like this, and we love hearing your thoughts and suggestions in the comment section. See you soon in the next video.